Hello, second graders. Welcome to Science with me, Miss Taylor. We are starting our new unit on rocks and minerals. And so today we are going to learn about the layers of the Earth. All right, and there is some information I'm going to share with you from a book called Planet Earth Inside Out by Gail Gibbons. So some of our learning goals for today, we are going to learn some information about the Earth. We are going to identify the 4 layers of the Earth. We're going to learn characteristics of each of the 4 layers. And we are hopefully going to color and label a picture of the Earth. So this is in your optional science packet. So if you want to pause the video, you could find your packet, or you could do that at the end. That's fine too. All right, so here is our book. It's called Planet Earth Inside Out by Gail Gibbons. And I really like Gail Gibbons. She is an author who writes all kinds of interesting nonfiction books. And nonfiction means it's about real things, true things. All right, here is our Earth. Earth is the 3rd planet from the sun. It is the only planet we know of that has just the right environment for plants and animals to live in. It's pretty neat. So there's the sun, and there is the Earth. So 1, 2, 3. There's Mercury, Venus, Earth. So we are the 3rd planet from the sun. Scientists believe planet Earth was formed about 4.6 billion years ago. They think this happened when a cloud of gases and dust was pulled together by a force called gravity. Well, we know about gravity, don't we? That's the force that pulls things to Earth. As the clouds spun around, small particles began sticking together. Slowly, planet Earth became denser and bigger. The heaviest materials, like iron and nickel, sank to the center. All right. And there is a picture of all the cloud of gases and dust that's being pulled together by gravity. And we can think of gravity as kind of like, I like to think of it as sort of like, it's kind of like a magnet that's pulling everything to the center of the Earth. And it says here, gravity is an invisible pull that makes objects attract other objects. At first, Earth was very hot. As it cooled down, it became hard on the outside. Steam rose from the planet's surface and fell back as rain. Over a long period of time, most of Earth became covered with the oceans. The surface that remained above water became land. Some scientists think that at one time on Earth there was a single massive piece of land, which they called Pangaea. So you may have heard about this. It is like a big, huge piece of land that scientists think maybe the Earth had just this big, gigantic piece of land at first called Pangaea. These scientists believe that about 250 million years ago, Pangaea slowly split apart into 7 smaller land masses. Between them, the oceans created their own shapes. So we can see here, this is maybe what scientists think the Earth looked like 250 million years ago. And you can see the land and the oceans, the shapes are changing 50 million years ago and today. So there is Africa. There's Africa, there's Europe, there's Asia, and over here, here's North America and South America. Viewed from space, Earth looks blue. Sunlight shining on the water that covers much of the planet gives Earth its blue color. Also, it looks perfectly round, but it isn't. Instead, it is slightly flat at its north and south poles and bulges a little at its middle. Right here, kind of bulges around the middle. Kind of like, you can think of this part, the equator, it's sort of like a belt around the middle of the Earth. Kind of like you've had too much to eat, and then maybe you tighten your belt and your tummy bulges over your belt. Let's see. So the middle is called the equator. The equator measures 24,912 miles around. Whew. It would take 25 million people holding hands to circle it. Earth is very big. Almost 3/4 of Earth's surface is covered by 4 oceans. The 7 land masses are called continents. All right, and here is a picture of our Earth and the continents. There's North America, South America, there's Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia, and Antarctica. All right, planet Earth looks different on the inside. And as we look at some information, some pictures about what the Earth looks like on the inside, I want you to think about, how do we know what Earth looks like on the inside? Planet Earth looks different on the inside. It has 4 layers. The distance to its center from the planet's surface is about 4,000 miles. So from the surface to the very middle of the Earth, 4,000 miles. At its center is the inner core. Right here, the inner core. Scientists believe the inner core is a hot ball of solid iron and nickel, about 1,500 miles across, with temperatures reaching 11,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Wow, that is really hot. That's about 50 times as hot as boiling water. Boiling water times 50. It is thought that the inner core is solid because of the huge weight of the rest of Earth pressing all around it. So that huge weight that's pressing on it makes the core solid. Outside the inner core, so there's our inner core, is the outer core. The outer core is about 1,300 miles thick. That's about how far it is from New York City to Miami, Florida. Scientists believe the outer core is made up of very hot liquid iron and metal. The inner core is solid. The outer core has liquid metal, liquid iron and nickel. At its deepest level, it can get to be about 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Also pretty hot. The outer core moves around the inner core very slowly, making electricity that creates Earth's magnetic field. So that kind of rubbing, that friction creates electricity that makes the Earth's core kind of like a magnet. And here it says, imagine the magnetic field as a huge bar-shaped magnet inside Earth. Its poles lie near the Earth's geographic poles. The magnetic field is what causes a compass needle to point north. So we can imagine this kind of magnetic bar inside the Earth. Around the outer core is the mantle. So now we're in this orange part, the mantle. It is about 1,800 miles thick and can be as hot as 7,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Most of the mantle surrounding the outer core is solid. So most of this is solid. But some of the outer mantle is made up of partially molten or melted rock that moves slowly like molasses. So kind of up here, some of this is sort of like molasses is sort of like very thick maple syrup. And so some of the mantle is liquid rock. Outside the mantle is Earth's crust. So right here, this very thin layer is the crust. Looks a little bit brown in the picture. It is very thin compared to the other layers. Earth's crust is made up of rock and soil. If Earth were the size of a peach, its crust would be about as thin as a peach's skin. Wow, so if we imagine that the Earth is kind of like a peach, the crust of the Earth would be like the skin of the peach. In other words, very, very thin. Sometimes we also compare the Earth's crust to an egg, and the egg shell is like the crust of the Earth, very thin compared to the other layers. All right, scientists divide the Earth's crust into 2 parts, the oceanic crust and the continental crust. The oceanic crust lies below the oceans. It forms the ocean floor. Some oceanic crust runs underneath the continental crust, which forms the land above sea level. So underneath the ocean, we call it the oceanic crust, and underneath land, we call that the continental crust. Alrighty, so we have learned a little bit about the layers of the Earth. We have learned that the Earth is made up of 4 layers. How many layers? So we have the crust. The crust is the outer layer. We walk on the crust. It is made of rock and soil, and the crust is very thin compared to the other layers. Underneath the crust, the mantle. Some of the mantle is made of hot liquid rock called magma. And magma is a word for that hot liquid rock that's underneath the surface. Sometimes the hot melted rock in the mantle squirts up through cracks in the crust. Those are called volcanoes. We'll learn about those later. The outer core is under the mantle. The outer core is so hot the rocks and minerals are liquid. And the fourth layer, the very inner core, the very center, the inner core is under the outer core, so the very center. The inner core is also very hot, but it is solid. So this is an activity that you might want to do. You have this page in the back of your science packet. And if you would like to color it, it says, use the clues below to help you label Earth. Use the code on the moon to color each part of the Earth. So there are some clues down here at the bottom to help you to label the different parts. And then there is some information about the coloring code up here. So it says clue number 1, the mantle is between the crust and the core. Where's the mantle in this picture? Between the crust and the core. I'm thinking it's this one. Is this the mantle? Number 2 says we live on the outer layer called the crust. Where's the crust? Yeah, there it is. This one is the crust. And clue number 3 says the core is found at the center of Earth. Yeah, right here is the core. Now on this paper, it kind of just tells us the 3 layers, the core, the mantle, and the crust. But we know that the core is actually divided into 2 layers. There's the inner core, and then there's the outer core. But on this paper, we just have the one. So here is a picture of Miss Taylor's inside the Earth picture. And I've colored my core. There's my core. And I can see that I colored my core is red, and I sort of color coded my code here, my color code or the key. There's my core is red. My mantle is orange. There's the mantle. The crust is brown. And then the last thing we have is the water and the land. So the water is blue and the land is green. Alrighty, so that is, before we go, I just remembered I wanted to share with you, if you were wondering, well, how do we know all about, the layers inside the Earth, Ms. Taylor? Well, here's some information about that. That's incredible. You might wonder how scientists found out that the Earth has 3 layers, or technically 4, but they're calling the crust or the core 1 layer. After all, no one can travel to the center of our planet. It's much too hot. Many years ago, seismologists, those are scientists who study earthquakes, and we'll learn more about earthquakes later, noticed that waves of energy travel through Earth during and just after an earthquake. After carefully measuring the energy waves, seismologists realized that the waves speed up, slow down, and change direction as they zoom through the planet. So seismologists were able to look at the waves of energy that traveled through the Earth and how they traveled through different layers at different speeds, things like that. At first, scientists had trouble explaining these changes. Eventually, however, they decided that the movement of energy waves indicates that different parts of Earth's interior are made of different materials. In recent years, seismologists have studied earthquake waves to calculate how thick each layer is and to determine the makeup of each layer. In other words, they were able to look at the information from these waves of energy to figure out how thick the layers were and what kind of minerals and metals and rocks each layer is made of. So that's kind of cool. So to review, today we learned some information about the Earth. We identified the 4 layers of the Earth. Let's see, we have the What's that outside part called? The crust. And underneath the crust, mantle. And underneath the mantle, outer core. And the very center, the inner core. Yes. We have learned some characteristics of each of the 4 layers. And hopefully we were able to color and label a picture of the Earth. And that is our science lesson for today. I will see you again soon. Thank you, second graders.